Good afternoon, everybody. This is Nelson from PaperCut. I want to thank you guys for joining the workshop today. We're going to be talking about print deploy. I'm going to give some other members that are joining us a couple more minutes, maybe like about 5 more minutes here before we start. Yes, I'll check back in about 2 minutes or so just to see how it is, and we'll feel it out. Let's give it another 5 minutes. Thank you, guys. Also, just to test out, I just want to make sure you guys hear me. If somebody hears me, just let me know. Just respond in the chat or just raise your hand as well as a test. Thank you, guys. I see hands raised. Awesome. Thank you. All right, I'm doing another check-in, and we're going to get started here in a minute or so. I'm just giving it another minute before we have some other members join us today here. For the folks that just joined us, I want to thank you guys for joining the workshop today. We're going to be covering print deploy. And again, my name is Nelson. Um, and if you just joined and you hear me, raise your hand just to want to make sure that everybody gets to hear me. One more time here. Thank you, guys. I see hands raised. Awesome. Thank you. All right, we're going to get started in a minute here. All right, perfect. So it looks like we got quite a few members here that joined us today. And again, for the third time, I want to thank everybody for joining the workshop today. My name is Nelson de la Fe, and I work for PaperCut. We're going to be covering print deploy here in a small lab environment that we have set up for training purposes for these workshops. It's going to be something new to try, and hopefully a lot of help to us, and for us to demonstrate this to you guys, this product to you guys. Firstly, I want to talk about our scenarios, and the scenario that I have set up here today. I'm going to share my screen. Just give me a moment here. All right. So as you guys, if you guys can see my screen here, raise your hands. I want to make sure that everybody can see my screen. Perfect. I see hands raised. Awesome, awesome. So here we have a 2012 R2 server, and it is designated and resourced out just for running the PaperCut application service, and alongside the internal database that it has. We are running PaperCut 19.2.3, which is the latest and greatest. Okay, we have a small amount of users imported that we're going to be working with here today. And as well as we have a bunch of print queues that we're going to be working here with today. Okay. I'm waiting for the printers list to load here. This is our print list, our printers list. And as you guys can see, this is reporting from our print server. I'm going to go ahead and share my print server screen here so you guys can see. Okay. And this is my print server. All right. I'm going to be switching screens from back and forth. So if it causes too much of a headache, let me know. I apologize in advance. It's just a better way to keep it clean. And that way we don't confuse the screen sharing session. So here's my print server, and here are all the queues that I have. As you can see, I have my follow me queue. This is a virtual queue. Okay, and I have different brands and variety of copiers and MFDs. Generally, our follow me queue is working with the PaperCut Global PostScript driver, which is a universal driver, as you all know. And it should be able to talk down to any of these model branded copiers, different branded model copiers. It doesn't matter which type of copier it is, it should speak to all of them. Each of the target queues or the direct copiers, the direct queues, should have their own standalone drivers. Okay. The only queue that I am sharing out is our follow me queue. Our print server is in a domain, and our application server is also part of a domain. I've made the domain Ecolab, just to kind of brand it with the EcoPrintQ logo, and as well as to kind of mention, it's just our lab environment. Okay, perfect. So here we have our lab computer, our lab server, our lab application server, our lab print server, and now I'm going to introduce you guys to our lab workstation, domain joined workstation, which is a Windows 10 Pro based workstation. It doesn't have any queues yet. The idea with the domain shared one is to show you guys how to have the MSI file that our print deploy software is going to create from a reference computer. And I'm going to demonstrate that sooner or later. And then we have one more workstation joining us today, and then that is workstation that is not domain joined. I'm also going to use it for, I realized that I need another domain joined computer so that I can kind of mimic from a reference computer to and then to clone onto. So I will use it as a pretend method that it is a domain joined computer, but as of now, it is a non-joined domain computer because I'm also going to be demonstrating how to have print deploy work in environments. Believe it or not, we have lots of environments, a lot of customers that have small work group environments that don't have a domain or don't have a server, and they're just hosting PaperCut off a Windows 10 box on a Dell, on an Optiplex or something like that. Okay, so when you guys have questions, I am going to ask you guys to keep, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and ask the questions in the thing. I'll try and answer as much as possible. I'll stop in between my, my intake of air so that I can help answer those questions as much as possible. Okay. All right. So the good thing is we've introduced our lab environment. I'm going to go back to our application server here, and I'm going to go over first. Okay. I'm going to go over first the print deploy screen. As you can see, PaperCut in version 19 introduced a print deploy feature, and it pretty much switched the interface, and it added a whole new tab called Enable Printing. Now, when you click on Enable Printing, it gives you multiple tabs. It gives you the print deploy, and it gives you the mobile BYOD screen. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the screen because I see that I understand that it's hard to see because it's kind of zoomed in, and I have to be scrolling like this. So I'm going to zoom this out into, I'm going to share my desktop screen, my desktop browser, my actual browser for my desktop, so we can actually work with it. So I'm going to be browsing over to that server, okay? So now we have a larger browser that we can work with so we can see more space. All right, and that is perfect. Okay, I'm logging in. Perfect. Okay, so back to the tab, enable printing. They've introduced, they put the print deploy interface here on the this actual tab, and they've also added the mobile and BYOD. So this includes mobility print, web print, which it pretty much embraces any BYOD devices that an environment wants to bring into play. But let's talk about print deploy here. So print deploy is made up of this small interface. And this small interface offers the option to add separate zones. And you could pretty much look at zones in a way of, let's say you want to maybe create a zone based off of an IP range. Maybe you have different subnets. Maybe you're subnetted out, maybe because you have this office and this office is in with this subnet range. Then you have another office and that office is within that subnet range, and then maybe you want to manage it that way. And what I mean about managing is that you can designate certain queues to those different subnets. Obviously, if you're in I'm going to say in the Aventura office, so this is an actual city that we have here in Florida, then maybe this queue is only designated to that office, to the users that are in that office, or to the computers that are in that office, because that copier is physically in that office, and so on. You can also manage zones by user groups. So in PaperCut, which I haven't brought any groups, you have the possibility to manage users by groups, just like you do in Active Directory. In Active Directory, you can set users in a group and an OU, and you can bring in those OUs as a whole entire group in PaperCut, or you can bring in groups from AD into PaperCut. Okay, perfect. All right, so if we go into our groups list, I don't have any groups currently right now. I can't create one. But I think we can go as far as understanding what that means. So if all users consider it a group, okay, we're gonna go back into our print deploy screen here. All right, so we can manage these zones as groups. So when we create a zone, we have the option to name it, and I'm gonna name this zone. I'm gonna call it domain workstations. Okay. And the display name is going to be, as it says there, a friendly name for the zone that users will see in their printer list. Okay, I'm going to call it eco print workstations, or maybe, as I said earlier, the Aventura office, right? An Aventura office, perfect. Okay, here I'm just going to leave it open. I'm not going to go by IP range. I'm not going to go by users, just for the sake of the presentation. So, okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and create that domain. Perfect. Now, what's pending here is the queues. We haven't talked about the queues, and how do we go about adding the queues that I want to deploy out to the computers? Well, we need to designate a reference computer that currently already has queues, and we need to then work with that reference computer to be able to clone out to the rest entire computer. So let's say, for example, you start working on setting or rolling out computers or rolling out your printer queues, and you want to start deploying these queues. You're going to want to first set it up on one computer. However the method is, if it's domain join and they're just going to connect to a map share, basically a printer share, that's perfect. That's a perfect reference. Or for non-domain workstations, if you're going to set up a direct queue, that also works fine. So we're going to go with the first session, with the first scenario here. We're going to go with the domain joined session. So in a domain environment, obviously queues are shared. In this case, I showed you guys the follow me queue, and that's being shared. And I want all my workstations to just work off that queue because it's universal and it's convenient. And then that way people can just walk up to any of the devices and release their jobs if you guys are familiar with the follow me functionality, they could release any of the jobs and it's being managed through the server. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and demonstrate that. So firstly, I need to switch over to the reference computer that I'm going to be connecting to that shared queue. I haven't yet connected to that shared queue, but I'm going to be demonstrating how to do that. And I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with how to do that. So I'm going to switch my screen from this browser to the first workstation, the main joint workstation. Okay, so this is my domain joined workstation. All right. As you can see here, our print server is accessible over the network. And I've called the print server lab PRT-SRV. Right? And here I can see all my shared queues. Now, the same functionality later on down the line when we go on the non-domain computer, it wouldn't apply the same because there's no authentication. It's not domain joined. So it's going to require authentication. And I just wanted to throw that out there just to remind you guys that when I demonstrated from copying it from this as a reference computer onto that non-domain joined computer, I'm probably gonna, for the sake of the demo, I'm gonna have to join it. I'm gonna have to authenticate like if I'm joined to a domain. I'm gonna make it seem like if it's joined to a domain momentarily. Okay. All right. So here's my follow me queue. I'm gonna go ahead and connect to that queue. Perfect. Now, me as the administrator, I've made my reference computer and I'm going to show the control panel. Okay. And as you can see here, when I go to the printers tab, I can see my mapped queue. And I'm going to pause here for a second because I'm just going to look at the questions list here and just go over any questions or concerns that anybody has. Just bear with me for a second here. Give me 1 second, guys. All right. So Timothy was saying he was having a black screen, cannot see his screen. All right. Can everybody see my screen? I just want to make sure because I see a lot of complaints, no picture. Okay. Perfect. Right. Okay. Okay. Sorry, Timothy. Thank you for that. Appreciate that. And John, what are you seeing? Are you seeing a screen too small, too squared? Too square. Yeah. So the limitation of it is just the VM session. They're on a VM, and I'm using the VM software to host. I can't really change the resolution on it. I wish I could. Let's see here. See if I can make this a little bit wider. Let's see if I can extend that. So it doesn't expand very nicely, or it doesn't stretch out to the size of the screen that I'm stretching out. John, I'm gonna go ahead and just hit auto fit here. Is it too big and squared, or is it just not, the text is visible still at least, or? Here, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you. Sorry guys, give me 1 second here. Just troubleshoot this.
Yeah, Nelson, it's just big and square. It's really hard to see, and you're not given a full 4x3 or 16:9, so you're blowing off things in the screen.
Okay, so it's just very large.
It's just very large at this point. I mean, now we can see it all, but it's difficult to see.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, John. Thank you. All right, guys. So I'll work with this next time. Next time we have our thing, and I'll see how we can do about stretching this a little bit larger. Maybe I have to use a different viewer from VM to make this this experience a little bit better. Hopefully, you guys can bear with this for a little bit. I'm gonna be switching from screen to screen again, and if you guys can see something, let me know. All right. Okay. All right. So we're back on the domain joined computer, and we were able to connect to that follow me queue, as you guys can see here. Now I need to get the cloner tool. PaperCut, the print deploy. I need to log in here. Okay. Our print deploy, our PaperCut screen doesn't really give the example of, or how the instruction basically on downloading the cloner tool. So what we need to do now is we need to get that follow me queue, and we need to pass it on over to the workstation. I'm going to go ahead and delete this because this is from a previous. Okay, perfect. That was from a previous solution. Okay, perfect. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and minimize this, and I'm going to switch back to my Windows workstation. I hope I didn't confuse anybody. Confuse back to that. All right, here we are. Okay. So Timothy, it depends on the environment. It doesn't need to be joined on the domain in order for the cloner tool to work, because basically you're just accessing the PaperCut interface through a web interface. Basically, as you saw, I was accessing it through the browser, and you can download as long as you're logged in as admin, you can download the cloner tool on any workstations to reference from. So if you do have a domain, but then you're going to set up a zone just for your non-domain workstations, which it exists. There's domain environments that have a small library or a small lab room where those workstations are not joined to domain, just for destructive purposes for the students. For whatever reason, you can set up a reference computer on a non-domain joined computer easily. And I'm going to demonstrate that too, okay, on the non-domain joined computer. Okay. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and access our browser here on this reference computer. Well, Timothy, to answer your question, the only way to access that is as an admin. And when you're saying logged in as an admin on what, on the workstation or onto PaperCut? Okay, so we're logging onto PaperCut here. Well, in order to run the cloner tool, I believe you do need some sort of administrative privilege to be able to copy the drivers. It can't be just any user. To give you a scenario, when this is done usually by an administrator. It's not usually done by a normal user or somebody that doesn't have administrative access to those workstations. So I'm assuming when they do log into those workstations that are even non-domain joined, they're going to have still some sort of administrative functionality to be able to run the cloner tool, or to be even able to install the client after the clone has been done, or vice versa. Okay, we're logging back into our PaperCut interface here, and we're going to go ahead and access our enable printing here. Now I should get that screen that I got back on that large browser, and I know that it is a little bit hard to see. It's very complicated to see, but I'm going to go ahead and click on this arrow up here, as you guys are seeing, and I'm going to go ahead and download the cloner tool, because this is the reference computer. This is the first workstation I want to reference my setup so I can copy and mimic that setting onto other computers. All right, go ahead and download that. Okay, Timothy. Yeah, most definitely. If you want, you and I can connect, or we can stay connected after this session, after this training, and we could go over, or throughout the training, we could go over your environment. Yeah, and I can definitely help answer those questions. Most definitely. Okay, so I'm done downloading the cloner tool. I'm going to go ahead and run it. Okay, perfect. UAC screen. Perfect. And here we have the cloner tool. It is made up of a DOS-based client or UI, user interface. All you have to do is pretty much hit enter, as the instructions say, and it does everything by itself, as you're seeing here. There's 6 steps in that after you hit enter. And what this is doing is that, keep in mind, it's gathering queue names, it's gathering port name, port type, the IP address of the port, the types of drivers. It's going to basically gather all that information from this queue, and it's pushing all that information back. It's like if you were doing an export through print management. So it's copying all that information and putting it back into a small MSI file and uploading it into the PaperCut interface. Okay, as you can see here, our interface was able to detect our follow me queue and our shared. It shows the shared path too as well. It shows that my print server is lab-prt srv, and the mapped queue is called follow me queue. Now this is perfect because I am under the domain workstation zone, so I want this queue onto my domain join because I just want to manage one queue for all users. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and save and deploy. Bam. Pretty much tells us that our MSI file is ready to download. So now the purpose of this is to download this MSI file once, store it somewhere so you can use it for future, so you can mass deploy it to all your workstations. There's different scenarios that you could do with deploying it. You can still go back on the group policy method, deploy the MSI file that way. I know you could do batch files. There's different, I know there's third-party software out there, especially for Macs. If you're a full-on Mac environment, there's Mac environments that rely on third-party deployment utilities, and that'll be beneficial for that too, because now you just have an MSI file to deploy, or for Mac OS it's DMG to deploy out, and then bam, all your queues will automatically be set up. Okay, all right, so let's go on to our non-domain join workstation. By the way, I remember I mentioned earlier that it's a non-domain join workstation, so for me to mimic and demonstrate that shared path, because it's technically a non-domain join, I'm going to need to probably give it some authentication, and for the sake of the demonstration, that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to give it a temporary domain authentication so that it can think that it's on a domain just like any other domain workstation. So here's my second workstation. Okay, now I need to log up. Now I need me as an administrator. I'm still doing this whole process. This is a one-time deal process as an administrator, because this is just the procedure that you have to go through. All right, I'm going to log back into the PaperCut interface, and I'm going to go look for that MSI tool that we've created with the cloning tool. Remember, that package is now stored on the PaperCut interface, so you don't have to really go to any folder paths yet to download it, and it's try to trick me up here, try to switch me to the user interface. Perfect. We're going to go to admin. Perfect, and then we're going to log in. And I'm going to zoom this screen out a little bit here so you guys can see that. Okay. All right, perfect. I'm going to switch back to the enabling printing screen. This is where the print deploy functionality is. Okay, and as you can see here, I have my zone ready. So basically now I need to download my print deploy client, and I'm obviously copying from a reference Windows workstation to a client-based Windows workstation. So my client tool is ready. I'm going to go ahead and download it. I don't know if I clicked on that, and I didn't. Now I did. There it is. Okay, so here is my client tool. Now, when it opens up, and I've done this before, so that's why you see the other one, which I'm going to delete. Okay, so this is my client tool, and this is the MSI file that you as an administrator can gather and store it somewhere, because this is, you can even name it. Name it your domain workstation as you named your zone. Name it domain workstation print deploy MSI.msi. However you want to name it, so that you can store it and have it with you for deployment. Just keep in mind this client was created once again with a domain environment. So from a reference domain workstation to a we're pretending here that this is a domain joined workstation as well, to a domain joined workstation. Since we are doing it with the shared path, that's telling PaperCut, and PaperCut auto detects this, and it auto knows this. It automatically will not install a direct print monitor on those reference computers or on the client workstation computer, because it is not needed. The PaperCut server or the print server has its own a secondary print server or print service, the print provider, and it is basically monitoring those queues and it's tracking those queues. We're going to leave the task to that print server. We're not making these standalone workstations. We're not making them small little print servers. We're not doing that because we're in a domain environment. What purpose do we have to install a direct print monitor? So PaperCut automatically, since it knows that we created a shared path based cloner tool and then a client MSI file, it knows that it doesn't need to add the direct print monitor as a deployment method to the MSI file. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run this tool. And before I do that, I should have tried to connect first to the shared path to make sure that I have authentication. Let's try to do that momentarily, just for the sake of the demonstration. Again, I say that a lot. I apologize for that, but I'm just making sure that we are uneven. So I've authenticated before, so it looks like it saved it. It's stored in my authentication, so perfect. So I'm probably not going to run into any issues. Okay, it thinks that this workstation is on domain as well. All right, perfect. Yes. Perfect. And as you can see here in a small glimpse, it shows DPM false. And that's basically telling you what I just told you about the direct print monitor. It's skipping the installation of the direct print monitor because it realizes it doesn't need to distribute that to this client computer, because it's a shared path. The shared path is connected to a server that has its own print monitor, and no local monitoring of any sort needs to be done to the local workstation. Perfect. All right. Just wait for a second for this to come up. Awesome. One thing that, since I've done this before, and it didn't ask me this time, I guess because we did the installation prior. After you do the installation of the MSI file, this comes up. This automatically comes up after you do the installation of the MSI file. This is no way around it. Actually, if you're logged into a domain-based profile, it should auto-detect the domain profile you're logged into, and it should automatically not pop up the screen. But if you're in a non-domain environment, it should pop up the screen. In this case, it did it for me because we're in a non-domain workstation, and it didn't do it. I pulled this up screen manually because I wanted to demonstrate what the screen looks like. So I'm going to log in with my PaperCut credentials or my domain credentials, which are basically the same credentials as PaperCut. Okay, because here we're telling it what queues I will get assigned based off of the zone that you created. Remember how I showed you guys that in the zone you can add groups, IPs, and it'll automatically know, it'll detect that information off the workstation, and it'll automatically know what it should send to you or what printers it should attach to the workstation or assign to your workstation. Okay, just for the sake of it, I'm going to hit refresh. Okay. And as you can see here, it looks like it's adding the printer along with the drivers. I'm going to go to control panel. That's the Windows 10 settings, which I hate. Let's go to the old-fashioned control panel. There it is. There's nothing like the old-fashioned control panel. Just waiting for that control panel to come up. We're going to browse on over to printers. And if the print deploy client tool worked successfully onto this second workstation, it should have also mapped my follow me queue for me automatically. Now I'm going to do a print test page, which is the important piece. We want to make sure that it's working, right? Print test page. Now this follow me queue on the server is a virtual queue, and it's also holding for release. So it should hold my job. So let's switch on over to the print server and verify that that job made it over to there. I'm switching you guys over to the print server. Do you guys see this screen, the print server screen? Perfect. You guys are awesome. Thank you. Okay. So here we can see, oops, and it logged me out. Let's go ahead and log back into the session. It idles out after quite some time here. All right. Here we can see that the job is actually there's a job waiting for me. I don't know if it's my job or not. We're going to open the print queue. And yes, it's my job, my test page, and it's waiting for me. If we browse on over to the main application server, which I'm going to switch over to my big browser here, you guys should be able to see my big browser here, and we should be able to go to printers. Oh, black screen now. Okay. Let me switch back on over to one of the workstations then. It's better that way. To the main application server. It's better that way. Do you see that now, Timothy? Okay, I think I know why it's going to a black screen. I think because whenever there's a smaller window over it, it announces, it tells me that there's something over it. It probably blanks out the screen momentarily until I remove whatever's in front of it. Okay, I'll work with that. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit smaller, but I'm going to go ahead and phase it out, maybe 80%. Let's go to printers, jobs pending release. And my job should also be there waiting for me to release my job at any of the computers, at any of the copiers. Okay, does anybody have any questions with the domains scenario that I just demonstrated before I switch on over to the non-domain? Any questions or concerns? Perfect. Now, I'm going to mention, because it's easier for me to know, just in case maybe you prefer to get unmuted. If you want to ask a question, preferably on a mic, just raise your hand, and I'll assume that you will have a question that you want to ask, preferably over the microphone. That way you don't have to type it out. I understand typing it out sometimes could be a nuisance. So if you prefer to actually just voice it out, let me know, raise your hand, and I'll assume already that that's because you want to ask a question, and I'll go ahead and unmute you, and we'll visit that like that. Okay, perfect. All right. Okay, so now let's switch on over to a second scenario. And our second scenario is the scenario that I mentioned previously. And it's basically the scenario of the small environments. These small environments tend to usually just have a Windows workstation running PaperCut. They're on a work group, and I need to somehow get my queues distributed out massively to all the users in a way that it's, I know that there's no group policy, there's no quick way of deploying this MSI file, just like you saw in the domain controller. In a domain environment, but it's still better than sitting there and generating. Let's say if you have to, at this point, the functionality of the follow me queue is a little bit limited. But let's say you have to set them up to 10 queues because they have 10 copiers. Yes, I know I said that they're a small environment, but they're not so small. They still print a lot. They still copy a lot. They're a law firm, and they have 10 copiers, ready back to back, because they need it. I've seen it. But it's easier for an MSI file to install, and so that the users authenticate, because it installs a bundle. As I mentioned earlier, it would basically it should install the direct print monitor, auto detecting that it's a non-domain reference computer, and it should also install that print deploy package, which would refresh based on the user that's there, depending on the subnet, etc. That's logged in. It should set out the auto queue for you, the queue that we've designated. So here I'm going to go ahead and create a new zone, and I'm going to go ahead and do that on the big browser, and I'm going to verify if everybody can see the big browser here. Let's switch on over. Now, do you guys see the big browser? It's black. How about now? On air. Okay, perfect. I see that there's a little icon on the top that says on air and off air. So when it goes off air, it goes into black. When it goes on air, it comes back. Perfect. Now I'm pretty sure this is much better for viewing. Okay, so here we have we're going to go back to our PaperCut screen, our print deploy screen, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new zone. And I'm going to create a new zone based off our non-domain environment. So I'm going to call it non-domain workstations. Okay. Non-domain workstations. All right. And I'm going to call this J Law Group. And if anybody has any customers that are really called like that, I apologize, but I think I made this up. I have this in my head somehow, and it just came up instantly. All right. All right. Perfect. Now, in this domain environment, as you can see here, that the queue that we've cloned from the domain environment is still there, and it's always going to be there because technically you can still add it to a non-domain workstation MSI file that we're going to compile. But that's not the point. Now we need to compile a set of queues from a workstation that's non-domain joined, and this workstation has pretty much all the direct queues in the environment to all the straight to the copiers, and they need to be somehow copied onto other workstations. So that way we have a consistent uniformity of queues and management, and tracking of jobs, etc., etc. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and switch on over to, because we're going to use the reference computer that we're going to use here today as a print server, because the print server has all the queues set up. Okay. All right. So we're going to switch over to the print server. Now let's pretend that the print server is just a workstation. Let's pretend that it's not a server. It's a small workstation, and it has all these queues set up on it. And I feel bad for whoever has to pinpoint, oh, I'm going to print to this queue. Oh, this one's right here. Oh, this one's right next to the lunchroom, whatever. I feel sorry for that person. But that's how I understand that's how it is still in some environments. Okay. All right. Technically, sometimes I know that they print to their closest copier, but for sometimes they're forced, or they're told that they need to have all the keys in the environment for whatever the reason, maybe for backup, redundancy, resiliency, whatever it is you want to say. So we're going to use this workstation as a reference because it has this server as a reference because it has all the queues already set up, and it has different brands of queues, and it's going to be a beautiful example. All right, so we're going to log into the PaperCut application server here to the web interface because we need to download the cloner tool from onto here. All right. And yes. Oops. All right. Perfect. Here we have, I'm going to zoom out a little bit so everybody can see that. Here we have the arrow. Okay. switch on over to non-domain workstation. All right. That's right. Okay. As you can see here, when I switch from these zones, I just wanted to bring this up. I've already connected this queue to this zone, so it's already here in the list. So it tells me there's no more queues to connect. But when I switch back to the zone that I newly created, the queue is here on this side because I haven't added it to this side. But I'm not going to be working with this queue. I'm going to be working with the new queues that I'm going to clone. All right. So we're going to go here. All right. And we're going to hit the plus sign right here. Okay. For all of those that missed that, this plus sign right here. All right. This lets you go back to your cloner tool. The cloner tool, I'm going to go ahead and download that tool. I'm going to go ahead and open up the cloner tool, and I'm going to run the cloner tool, and I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to go through the 6 steps. And it might take a little bit longer here on this workstation, on this server versus the workstation, because here we have what, about I saw maybe about 10, 13 queues. So it might take a little bit longer. All right, we're just waiting for this to finish extracting the information. And it's actually showing the size of this extraction is showing 231 megabytes versus I think the other one was only 130 kilobytes. It's a huge difference. That means it's compiled a lot of drivers. Perfect. So the cloner tool is done. It's done copying the queues. It's done copying all the information. So now if I exit out of the cloner option, maybe if I hit refresh, there it is. That was weird. I don't know why it didn't instantly update. It did after a refresh. Perfect. Here's all the queues. Here's all my direct queues. Now let's talk about the follow me queue being in a direct queue. If you copied the follow me queue, which is a virtual queue in PaperCut, configured with PaperCut, into this utility, and I don't know why it's not scrolling through. Let's see here. What queues am I seeing here? I'm seeing more queues here at the bottom. Let's get this on a bigger screen. Okay, give me 1 second here. Switch this over. Do you guys see that screen? Okay, perfect. All right, so here we have the queues, and I'm gonna go ahead and start copying. All I want, I'm not gonna copy all the queues. I'm gonna be a little bit, realistic here. I'm just gonna copy my Ricos. I'm gonna copy my Rico queues. All right, we have that one. We have that one. Okay, perfect. Connect to zone. All right. Oops, and I connected it to the wrong zone. Let's undo that. I need to switch over to the non-domain workstation zone. So I'm gonna go ahead and go back to my Ricos. All right, perfect. And as you can see here, we have 2 follow me queues. And I want you guys to understand that there's a difference. There's a difference between these two queues. One of them was a domain environment queue, follow me queue, and this is a direct follow me queue because we referenced from the server. We referenced from the server, the print server directly, which has the queues locally hosted onto them versus it being shared mapped queues. Like these queues were created locally onto them, so that print server is in charge of making communication printing communication straight to the copiers. And the difference is here, I just use that server as a reference computer versus as a for a moment we said, let's pretend that it's just a workstation with all those queues set up so we can use it as a reference. So these are all my reference computers, and this is my follow me queue. Now, it gets really tricky when you're in a work group based environment, not in a domain environment, because when you have a follow me queue in a domain, you can't cross redirect to another workstation, basically to the server that's hosting. So let's say you do have a small print server in an environment, or for whatever reason, you have to individually, when you set up this MSI file back onto the client workstation from this non-domain workstation. And I think I'm going to confuse a lot of people with this, and I can always explain it a little bit better if I have to. I apologize for that. So when I get ready to copy this clones utility that I'm creating onto a client workstation, it's going to set up those queues like a local queue, like if it's being its own print server. That workstation is going to be its own print server. It's going to be in charge of its own queues, and it's going to have its own direct print monitor. And it's going to be, so that follow me queue that I just copied, it's going to technically be not configured in PaperCut. It's going to be reported to PaperCut because the direct print monitor is going to tell PaperCut, hey, this workstation has this queue now set up. But it's going to just be a standalone queue. We're going to have to go in that queue again and configure it as another virtual queue, so that it can talk to its target queues on that same workstation. So you see how it gets a little bit complicated. That's why in workgroup environments, they usually don't go with the follow me queue and with the follow me queue option. They usually just print directly to queues. So that's why I didn't copy the follow me queue. So that's why it becomes a little complicated. Now I'm going to stop here for a moment because I don't want to lose people, and I want to make sure that I'm able to answer any questions. If you have any questions, go ahead and add it into the question box, or raise your hand if you prefer to voice it out, and that way I can better explain to you if I lost anybody there. Oh, you guys are great. I don't see any questions. I see Timothy has a question on a domain group. Yeah, thank you, Timothy. I noticed that too late. I know. Thank you for that. You guys are great. You guys are awesome. Awesome. All right. I didn't lose anybody. Perfect. So the follow me queue becomes very complicated in environments as such. It's usually not recommended, and it's usually just you can't make magic happen. So the best solution is just in a workgroup environment, make those workstations just print directly to the queues, and they'll know. Usually those environments, those queues are labeled kitchen printer or bath, next to the bathroom printer, or in the stairways printer, or first floor printer, second floor printer, whatever the case is. Whatever schematic you do with naming queues, I'm pretty sure this will be useful and helpful to the users that are printing directly to these queues. So I'm going to go ahead and save and deploy, because that's how I want my MSI file set up for non-domain workstations. Perfect. Now I went ahead and created this non-domain workstation, this non-domain MSI file. Now let me go clear up my, actually I don't need to clear up because it's only a shared follow me queue. Let's switch on over to that non-domain workstation. And I'm going to make sure that everybody sees this screen. Everybody sees this screen? I know I've asked that multiple times, but I just want to make sure everybody can see it. Perfect. Thank you, guys. All right. As you can see here, back into the PaperCut interface, and I'm going to refresh my screen because I just made changes to my non-domain workstation group zone. I'm going to switch over to that, and I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to download the client tool for this. I'm going to exit it. I'm going to actually, let's go into this folder and let's delete this so that I don't have any confusion, because they're both the same date, unless I can see the times that they were created. Let's delete that out of here. Goodbye. Perfect. And let's download the new one for the non-domain workstations. and I can exit out. It's downloading that tool. It's scanning for viruses. Okay, I know Rick has a question while we're waiting to download that. I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you, Rick. Hey, Rick, how are you?
Hi, pretty good. I'm okay. I was just raising my hand to let you know that I could see your screen. So,
Awesome. Thank you, Rick. That's okay. No, you're good. All right,
Okay.
thank you, Rick.
Sure.
All right, so here we have the new client tool, and I'm kind of confused. Well, it's this one. This is the new one. This is the one that I just downloaded. I'm gonna go ahead and open this one. This is the one non-workstation zone client tool. Now, if it worked correctly, and I'm pretty sure it did. Ooh, okay. That's right. I have to undo what I did on that. So let's do that. Let's uninstall. Let's take a moment here and uninstall this workstation really quick. That's that's another good reason right there, as you're seeing my struggle right now. It's a good reason why to have groups assigned to the zones. That way you don't have to deal with this process or this uninstallation. I'm installing the old client, uninstalling the old client. All right, so we shouldn't have a client anymore. Should go away momentarily. Let's perfect. So the print deploy package is out of here. All right. And the reason why I need to uninstall that is because the new MSI file is probably going to include the direct print monitor, since we're working with a non-domain work-based based environment now. So I'm going to go ahead and try to reinstall this new client. And it went through successfully. It didn't stop me as it did before. Oh. I'm still going to assume that it hopefully installed my DPM monitor. As it should have. And it did actually install our direct print monitor as I forecasted. And again, that happens automatically to the PaperCut, because PaperCut obviously auto detects the queues that you set up on that zone. And since I'm downloading the client from that zone, it knows that, okay, these look like direct queues. These look like queues that are port assigned. They don't look like a shared queue. So it knows that, okay, with this package, I'm going to include the direct print monitor for you. Although that thing said false, I'm going to find out what exactly that means, because it's misleading. Okay, because in the first domain one it said skip and it said false as well. So I don't know why it says that. I guess I was assuming that was, to let you know if it installed the direct print monitor or if it didn't. So we're gonna go check the services, and if it did install the direct print monitor, we should have a small print monitor running in the back end on this workstation in services. There's two things that I'm going to check right now on this workstation. I'm going to check the service and make sure that the DPM is installed. And then we're going to go check on the queues to see if it actually populated the queues on over to it. So here it is, PaperCut print deploy monitor. So it actually did install, and it's along with the client as well. So it installed the direct print monitor this time, and that's actually running this time. All right. The first time it doesn't install the direct print monitor, but this time it did. Okay. So on this workstation, I think I still haven't logged in, so it probably didn't set up the queues, but let me go verify. It didn't ask me to log in or to sign in. Maybe because it's automatically picking up on the token. I don't really trust control panel very much for local queues. Let's see, let's look at print management. Sometimes control panel takes time updating. And I know Windows 10 Pro now includes print management by default. So I knew print management was going to be a better option to look into to see if all the queues were locally installed. Okay, so it only set up one queue out of the 4 that I told it to. Let's go ahead and do a sign-in process one more time. Let's make sure. All right, so let's confirm. Why is it taking, I don't know why it's doing that bit by bit process. It shouldn't be doing that. All right, just refreshing here one more time. I'm giving it some time to set up the queues for me. One second here. It looks like it is adding them slowly. Slowly but surely it's doing it. Most likely because it's running into just some, there it is, setting. So those are the 4 queues. It just took some time to do it. So I apologize for being impatient there. I'm assuming maybe because it ran into this one that was offline, actually physically offline, and it probably didn't when a port is offline, and it usually takes a little bit longer to create that port. So I'm assuming maybe it ran into that process. But either way, all my 4 queues are here. Technically, you don't have to go through that refreshing process. It should have automatically done it for you after you've signed in. I'm going to sign in again either way, so I can tell it who I am. All right, perfect. I'm telling it that I'm Nelson, and I'm logged in as Nelson. All right, we got my queues here directly set up. Now, if this was done correctly, and the direct print monitor is automatically pointing to the application server, and that's to the main application server that's hosting PaperCut, I should see my queues in that printers list. So I'm going to switch over to the main app server, actually to my tab, to my full screen here. Does everybody see that full screen, that big browser? Okay, perfect. So we're gonna go to printers here, and we can see here the direct print monitors are set up here, and they're reporting from the they won't show like the actual print server, the print provider queues. They'll show up as direct print monitor queues. And if you click into them, the ones and the twos, queues, the top tab, you should be able to see the workstation that's hosting the queues. Okay, so they'll basically become monitored, at least through PaperCut, and you'll start seeing print jobs start shining in as they start printing to that. So I'm going to do a test page here, assuming that our IMC print test page. Okay, you didn't see that, but I sent the print test page on the other screen there. I apologize. All right. There's no hold and release on that queue, and I can see my job. I'm going to go ahead and click into that. Queues. I'm going to click on, I sent it on, well, job logs. There it is. I sent the test page. Okay. And that is the process to do non-domain join workstations. Now, I have some time. I'm going to pause here for some questions. Any questions or concerns? Maybe I missed something. Maybe there's a blank area that you know, and I steer and I aim to improve and better covering those areas. So if you have any questions or anything that you feel like I didn't cover, do you have any questions in regards to what I just demonstrated on the non-domain workstations? Okay, let's see. Timothy has a question. Okay. Yes, print deploy to Chrome OS. I cannot demonstrate that because it's hard for me to have a Chromebook, and we don't have a G Suite. You need a G Suite environment for all that. So I basically in a small outline, I gave you the tools that you need in order to deploy out queues to Chrome OS to Chromebooks, and it's basically just like mobility print, same functionality. But instead, you're gonna manage it through G Suite. And you're going to tell G Suite to download the PaperCut or mobility print extension. And you're going to deploy that out via G Suite to all the Chromebooks. And then there's a policy that you have to, a JSON policy that you have to add to that extension that you're deploying out to the Chromebooks. These Chromebooks, unfortunately, have to be managed. It only works for managed Chromebooks. There's a policy, and the policy includes what server to connect to. So they'll auto-detect the queues from the print deploy service. Same as mobility print service. It's actually the same identical solution from mobility print to print deploy for Chromebooks only. So that is the method. Unfortunately, they have to be managed on a G Suite environment, and the extension has to be deployed out to them, and a policy has to be added to the extensions. As you know, if you understand G Suite, you can, with just modifying the extension there in the G Suite environment, it'll push all that information to all the Chromebooks in your managed environment automatically. And I do not apologize again, Timothy. I don't have a form of demonstrating that. Now, does that answer your question, Timothy? That does. Okay, perfect. I know somebody, and I forgot who that was, and I apologize because somebody wanted to bring it up an environment, and I prefer to have that person voice it out. And I have Brian here with the question. If you can remind me who you are, just say it was me, and I'll come back to you. We have a college that is using the PaperCut client on student laptops. Okay. A question was asked about turning HTTPS on. Is there a way to do this without uninstalling the client? Yes, there's different clients that you can roll out. There's the local install, there's the cached install, local install, and there's the zero installer, which is just basically running off the server. But in order for you to run off the zero installer, you need server authentication to access that shared folder, et cetera, et cetera. But then you have the other option that I mentioned, the local cached option. That local cached option, it's a small, I forgot what type of file it is, if it's an MSI or something, but it says it in the folder, in the client folder. That will basically reach out to your PaperCut server every once in a while. If you're running that on the workstation, on that laptop that you're mentioning, it'll reach out to the PaperCut server every once in a while, basically on first connection that the laptop comes on, and it'll verify the config file on the server. And if this config file server has changed, it'll get a copy of it and it'll sync it back to the workstation or to the laptop, and it'll update those changes to the laptop. But you would have had to deploy it out with the local cache solution. If you are local install, then unfortunately the only way to do that is to reinstall the clients. Does that answer your question, Brian? Okay. Now somebody had an environment that they wanted to demonstrate to me or talk about, and I totally forgot who that person was. Can you remind me? Is that person in this meeting still? I totally forgot who that was. The questions moved along. That was me, Timothy. All right, Timothy, I'm gonna unmute you, and you can go over your environment. I think it'll be better if you voice it out. All right, give me 1 second. All right, Timothy, you're unmuted.
All right, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. How's it going, man? How's everything?
Go.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, I was just because we have a proof of concept we're going to be deploying out, and print deploy was obviously one of the things that they were interested in, just because managing printers is kind of a nightmare.
Right.
They do have, it's a school, so they've got faculty and students. Faculty is running on Windows, students are running on Chrome OS. I don't know if the Chrome OS is managed or not. I want to say it probably is. But the faculty laptops, and this is something that I needed to discuss with them anyway, sometimes they have their faculty, when they're working at home, they've just got like a local login, a non-domain login. And sometimes when the faculty come back into the school, they still just use the non-domain credentials instead of actually logging into the domain. Again, I don't know why they do that, but seeing that you could do domain and non-domain, I guess as long as the non-domain can see the PaperCut server, it should still be able to use the printers.
It should exactly. It should be able to do the direct print monitor on that laptop. So it should basically make that little laptop its own little print server, assuming the queues are not coming off the shares from the server, because that requires authentication, server-based domain authentication, et cetera, et cetera. I'm in a big question mark as you. I don't know why they didn't just roll out those laptops with the domain logins, because they could use it offline, even if they're off premises. They can still log into those laptops with domain credentials.
Yeah.
That would have been a lot easier for them. And then they would have had to not have that second print deploy, because it sounds like if they go with print deploy, they're going to have to basically go with two zones: laptops that are not domain joined and workstations that are domain joined.
Yeah, and it's a question that I think I'm going to ask is, why don't the faculty members just use their domain logins at home, since all of them can be accessed still, even though they're not on the school network.
Exactly.
And then the only other thing that I had was actually I mentioned basically the way that I was set up and having VMs. I did a local installation of PaperCut, just an NFR on my laptop for troubleshooting and testing, and I had Windows 10 developer running in VirtualBox, and it was having troubles connecting to. The cloner tool was having troubles pushing printers back to PaperCut, the PaperCut application server, and I don't know why. They kept on giving me errors.
So that's a good. Okay, so now I understand. That's a good question, Timothy, and it could be due to maybe local firewall on those workstations, because there's two things to check. First of all, I'm asking because I've never really dug deep into what port or what protocol is being used in order to transfer that information over as you're questioning over the PaperCut server, and maybe Sergio could help me. Sergio's on this call with us. I'm not sure what ports are used or what protocols are used to transfer that information, like the queue name and the port, like as you saw in the interface. That's a really good question. And I'm assuming what's going on is that there's probably some sort of miscommunication. There's probably some sort of disconnect there. For sure, there's still an issue there. Maybe there's an antivirus running. Maybe they have some sort of antivirus. Maybe there's an antivirus running. Maybe there's a local based Windows firewall that's interrupting. But here on this workstation here, we have Windows firewalls too, and that wasn't. And I have the default Windows settings enabled on our lab environment here that I demonstrated with today. So it might not be that. But it could be any third-party firewalls, maybe an in-house appliance-based firewall that could be cutting or. Sergio, do you know if you've ever run into that issue?
The only thing that I was guessing on that was because I'm logging in as a domain user on my laptop, which is where I've got my PaperCut installed, and the Windows 10 VM is just something I stood up and it's using like a generic IE user.
Oh, here's
to
another
log.
question for you. Maybe your VM, are you running it, or the NIC controller, are you running it in bridged, or are you running it in being able to, or in like in a NAT, or there's two functions, there's two settings that you can do in your VM, and I have my workstation and I can show you. Let me share my workstation browser here.
Yeah, I want to say it's possibly bridged. I was
So-
using VirtualBox.
Gotcha. So if you look at my screen here, if you're looking at my screen here, I'm going to bring in my Windows 10 box. This is my local computer at home, and I have that many resources assigned to it. And if you look at your network adapter settings, you probably have it by default, and I think it goes into host only, private network. I think it defaults to host only. And that's basically making it on its own little network. It has nothing to do with your network. But if you toss it back into bridge, it's going to access your network physically, like if it was a separate computer on your physical network.
Yeah, I think I'm either bridged or NAT on this one. Let me take a look here. This one is actually it's set up as NAT.
So there you go. That's probably what you're running into.
Try it as bridge then instead of NAT.
Most definitely. It's going to get an IP address of your physical network. It's actually going to reach out to your physical network. It's no longer going to be in its own virtual network like it was before.
Okay, yeah, because I could hit the PaperCut server from the VM, and I could download the cloner tool, but then after I run it, it finds the printers. It wasn't able to submit them back to the PaperCut server, so it could be something with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. All right.
All right. That was all I had.
All right, Timothy. Thank you. Test that out, Timothy, and feel free to email me. My email address is I'm going to put it in the chat here so that everybody can see it. I'm going to put my email in the chat so you can email me with any questions in regards to this or after you've tested. Okay?
Okay, sounds good. And your screen is black again. I'm not sure if you knew that one.
Yeah, I stopped sharing the screen. But all right. Thank you, Timothy.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye. All right. Anybody else have any questions? Any questions or concerns? Any environmental questions or, Timothy brought up a good, he has a PLC environment he's going to be working. If you have any PLC environments that are upcoming and you have any questions to help you, now's the time to ask. I'd be more than happy to help answer any of those questions. So, okay, in the meantime, I have some questions, some FAQs that are generally asked, and they're asked a lot in tickets that we received, and I've compiled a bunch of those questions for Print Deploy, and I've set it up here. It's only like about five FAQs, 5 questions. Okay, and one of them is, can I use a single reference computer to clone onto any OS? The answer to that is no. So one platform that I didn't cover here is Mac. I didn't cover the Mac OS environment because we don't have a Mac OS environment to technically test with at the moment. Right now, we only have the Windows environment, but with Mac, if you're going to clone from a Windows to a Mac, that is not going to work. First of all, the MSI file compiled for Windows is different versus what it is for a Mac. And when you reference from a Windows computer to and try to client out to a Mac, the way the queues are set up on a Windows workstation is entirely different versus what it's set up on a Mac. So if you're going to reference from a platform to platform, you have to reference from Mac to Mac That's a reference from Windows to Windows, and Chromebooks I'm not even going to mention because they're entirely on their own league. You could technically set up the queues to whatever way you want, and the Chromebooks would still be able to pick up the queues. That they're completely different solution. But from those two platforms, and Linux isn't supported yet. Right now, I think it's Mac OS and only Windows. So if you want to clone, you need to have a reference for each type of OS. You need to have a reference computer for your Macs, and I understand schools use a lot of Macs, and you need to have a reference computer for Windows machines. Okay. Timothy has another question here. Let me bring this tool out. Okay, Timothy's asking, forgot to ask, when using Chrome OS with print deploy, what reference queues will be used? Any of the queues, any of the others queues that you assign to the zone. So you can technically assign the Chromebooks to the zone. Generally, Timothy, most of the time, schools, especially schools that are using Chromebooks, when they're managing that through G Suite, through Google Suite, G Suite, they have a Wi-Fi environment just for students. And usually those Wi-Fi environments are subnetted out into a different IP scheme. Technically, you can assign the zone into that IP scheme so that you can tell only Chromebooks that are obviously going to be in that IP scheme because they're going to be joined to that Wi-Fi network are only going to be able to benefit from the zone that you created or highlighted or basically referenced out in when you're setting up the zones within PaperCut. That's correct, because somehow print deploy becomes its own little micro DNS server, just as mobility print is, and it'll basically broadcast out the queues on its own via the service. Yep. Okay. Thank you, Timothy. Okay, moving on to the first question. Anybody have any questions in regards to what I just said about the reference computers and the OS platforms? Okay. And I have another FAQ here. Cloning is a one-off process. So how do I add more queues later on? As you saw, I'm going to go ahead and share my small. Okay, yes, I'm going to share my big screen actually, my browser. All right, let's go to sharing here. Perfect. And we're going to go back into enable printing, and we're going to go back to our print deploy tab. So as you saw here, there's my drop down, all the queues that I've cloned out before. Obviously, this zone doesn't have all these queues. This zone does. It has three more queues versus the other one. Any of the clone tools that you've cloned before from reference computers, you can simply add them and connect them to the zones. Now, if you need to clone or reference from another computer that is not in these and that queue is not on here for whatever reason, you can simply hit the plus sign and download the cloner tool. That cloner tool is going to run, it's going to auto detect what your environment is. So if you're, actually, no, you have two options here, never mind. If you're in a Windows environment, you're going to click on the Windows cloner tool, and if you're in a Mac, you're going to download the Mac OS cloner tool. Once it runs that command-based UI, it'll pick up on the queues that are locally on that reference computer and toss them onto the PaperCut server, as Timothy and I were talking earlier. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop sharing that screen. Okay. All right. Do I need to keep the reference computer on? This is a really good question. No, you don't. The reference computer is just providing a template of examples of what needs to be tossed for. This is specifically mainly for non-domain, because I would see the confusion in a non-domain environment. Does my reference in a non-domain environment, does my reference computer need to be turned on? And the answer is no. The queues are basically copied and cloned as a template, and what they need to be, and drivers are copied across, basically extracted, port information, queue name, etc. All that information is extracted back onto the PaperCut server so that when you get ready to install the client on a separate workstation, that client would basically inherit that template information from the reference computer. But the reference computer doesn't need to be necessarily on, because now you're making that workstation, that client workstation, you're making it its own small print server. Now for a domain environment, as you saw, if you're going to go with the shared domain paths, then obviously no. The server obviously needs to be on. It is a print server, and that shared path is dependent on the server being available. So for domain environment, the server that you're getting the shared path from, yes, that server needs to remain on, as the shared path is dependent on that server staying on. Okay. If the reference computer crashes, can I use a new reference computer to update print queues or add new reference computers as well? Yes. Basically, referring back to question question 2, cloning is a one-off process. How do I add more queues later on? Basically, you could just hop onto it. You can spin up on the second reference computer, set up the queues again, copy the queues, add more queues if you need to, and clone from there, and start all over. All right. Now, one thing I did wanted to mention is if you decide to want to set up multiple zones, there is and this is brought up a lot as well, and I don't know how I forgot how I missed that today. But to create separate zones, you need to have a licensing package, an advanced print deploy license package, and that's additional from the PaperCut cost. You are entitled, every PaperCut environment is entitled to one zone creation. So generally, if you're worried about one zone, and I think you're golden. The print deploy solution, if you plan to use it and you're okay with that one zone, you're golden, and you go for it. You have that one zone to create. But if you're at a complicated environment where you're going to work based off the groups, or you're going to work based off IP ranges, and you want to create separate zones to identify different queues for each of whatever the case is, whatever flavor that you want to go with zones, then yes, you're going to need the advanced print deploy licensing package to help you create different zones and set up zones and identify the method that you want to use for your users. And those are all the FAQs that I had. I don't have any other FAQs. Maybe Sergio, do you have any questions that you want to bring up?
No, I'm good.
All right. And Sergio's good. And do you guys have any questions? Do you guys have any POCs or any examples that you're gonna, now's the time to ask. And again, if for whatever reason you want to ask on a separate email, you can just email me directly, or you can email support@ecoprintq.com, and you can ask a question there. All right. Okay. It doesn't seem like we have any more questions. I think you guys are great. I think you guys are awesome, and hopefully I wasn't very confusing. And if you want to provide any feedback and anything I can improve, maybe I know that the screen sizes is something that I need to look at, and I'll work on that next time to see how we can improve the screen sizes for next time. If there's anything else that you guys want to leave feedbacks towards to, I would suggest emailing myself, nelson.delafe@ecoprintq.com. I put it in the chat, and you can always just email support@ecoprintq.com with the feedback as well. We're listening, we're all ears. Whatever we can do to improve, we're all for it. I know one thing I do need to improve is that screen sharing size, and I'll figure something out with the VM sessions. Okay, guys, I think that's pretty much it. I don't have any other questions, any FAQs, and you guys were great. I appreciate you guys' time. Thank you very much for coming. You guys are wonderful, and I hope you guys are staying safe. Thank you, guys.